Time now for Touchdowns and Fumbles, where we examine how the newsmakers of the week handled the news. Here from Veritas Communications once again on a Friday is Bob Reid. Bob, where else to begin but with President Trump? And let's start at the beginning, shall we? And the announcement earlier this week that FBI Director James Comey was out.
There are so many dimensions to this, it's hard to keep them all straight. But let's look at it from a communication standpoint. If there's anything that went right on this, I haven't found it yet.
Okay.
Right from the outset, it seemed like they thought they could do this announcement pretty much just by press release. It was late in the day. It was towards the end of sort of business hours, and an official statement from the White House that Comey had been removed from his position as director of the FBI. So there were no surrogate spokespeople on the White House team lined up ready to make the rounds of the cable news networks and everything else. This says to me two things. One, they either thought that it wouldn't play out as a big deal, that the president, who's under investigation by the FBI, or at least his campaign is for potential ties to Russian meddling in the election, that development wouldn't play out as a big deal, wouldn't be controversial, or that the narrative that was being put into place was going to be almost defending the indefensible.
Right. Well, not having your surrogates out there and at the ready, of course, left everybody, and you saw this on cable news for the next 24 hours, just taking that letter, picking it apart, and you didn't have anybody, Trump didn't anyways, having anybody put the White House spin on it.
Right. And then Trump saw all that and said, we got to get people out there. And then we saw the Kellyanne Conways and Sean Spicer, that bizarre scene where he went to do a live TV hit on the lawn of the White House, and then the press corps saw that, converged on the scene, and he took refuge among the bushes so that he wouldn't have to suddenly do an on-the-spot news conference. Just disastrous all the way around. So this says to me that there was no clear plan for it, and even the messaging narrative that they tried to lay out, that this was a decision based on advice from the Attorney General's office, that Comey was no longer in a position to execute his role effectively. That was the stated narrative, the
and that
rationale
was thought to provide at least some cover, if you will, for the fact that Trump wasn't doing this just because he was under investigation.
Precisely.
He was doing it on the advice of the Deputy Attorney General. However, in an interview last night, exclusive to NBC, Trump had this to say about the firing. Have a look.
It was set up a while ago, and frankly, I could have waited, but what difference does it make?
All right, so Trump contradicting pretty much Bob. Everybody saying, no, I made this decision actually previous to talking to the Attorney General, and it was my decision.
Never seen anything like it, right? So much effort was put into laying out that narrative that this was why this was done, and then he nukes it in one interview. No, I had decided quite some time ago that he had to go because A, I think this whole Russia thing, there's nothing to it. It's Democrats whining because they lost the election, and B, he's a showboat. He's not effective. He's lost the confidence of the rank and file, and we've heard nothing but contradictions to that from senior ranking officials with the FBI. Since the acting director has now said no, very much top down. He had the respect and the confidence of the organization, and also the investigation into the alleged links between the Trump campaign and the Russian meddling in the election, a very serious and ongoing investigation.
And what you have now, because of all of this, is a bit of a credibility gap or crisis, I think, within the White House. What story is true? How did this actually go on? Thanks to your point, fumbles all the way along.
Well, and we're seeing it now again this morning with other voices emerging and saying, no, I was at that dinner where they discussed Comey's loyalty. And
the demand for loyalty, and he only promised honesty. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, let's move off Donald Trump and on to our leader, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Here he is touring in Quebec, the floods that have just ravaged that area. Always important, of course, for a leader whenever there's a big natural disaster or crisis to be on scene.
And then on the flip side of it, always those voices who will say, well, isn't he just getting in the way? And isn't he just creating photo ops to show that he's demonstrating concern for the people who are affected by this? I think this is absolutely a touchdown for the Prime Minister. It's the right thing to do for any leader when there's a time of crisis, a natural disaster. You've got to show up. Now, the timing and the manner in which you do that is open to debate. And recall pretty much exactly a year ago when the fires swept through Fort McMurray, Alberta. Trudeau didn't go right away. He said, I will go there at the right time, but if I go right now, I'm just going to get in the way. And he's right, because a visit, particularly by the head of government, is very disruptive. It really does complicate the logistics on the
Just really quickly here, does he have to be careful because we've got reports of massive flooding set for BC? He better be ready to make a trip out west as well, Ben.
Absolutely. Again, at the right time and in the right circumstance, but he's got to show up because the optics of not being there vastly outweigh any criticism you might get for some photo ops.
All right, touchdowns and fumbles for another week with Bob Reid from Veritas Communications. Bob, pleasure as always.
Thanks.